Imagine walking into your boss's office and giving notice because your writing has become your primary revenue stream. Or your podcast is successful enough that you can quit your day job. Or maybe having your marketing on autopilot so you can spend your time on the art career you love rather than on marketing. Are you a creative person who's great at what you do, but marketing makes you freeze? You're not alone. I help passionate, purpose-driven creatives overcome fear, find their brand voice, and build a marketing strategy that works for them. Oh yeah, I also make it easy and painless. It's never too late to grow the business you've been dreaming about. Book an introductory call with me, Rob Southgate, at southgatesmallbusiness.com today. And let's take the pain out of marketing together. Welcome to Ink Blots, the show where I interview authors about their lives, writing, and the books they love. Be sure to follow the Ink Blots podcast on Substack. Not only can you listen to the latest episodes, but our Substack also has interview transcriptions and links to books and other items that we talk about on the show. If you like what we're doing, please give us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts and on YouTube. It really helps us and our sponsors out. Oh, and leave comments. We really do read and respond to every one. Now, let's get on with the show. Welcome to Ink Blots. I am Rob Southgate. Today I have with me a horror author. What a shocker. I love horror authors, so that's why we get a good, healthy dose of them on this show. I have Aleco Julius, who is a horror author from the Chicagoland area, and he just did an event with me, so we may touch on that a little bit. Or we might not. Just know that he did. And Aleco, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Rob. I really appreciate you having me. Thanks also for the other day. Nightmare on Chicago Street was a lot of fun. I got a chance to meet a lot of cool people. Was able to get interviewed. And great people watching. And it was a great event. So thanks for that. I appreciate you having me on to talk about books and horror.
Yeah. So people listening, if you like this and you want to see more from Al, the radio station that interviewed him is going to be sending him clips so you can actually see the interview from that as well. You know, some people just can't have enough Al. So that's the way they get that little bit of extra. So we'll make sure we get that to you, or I'll make sure they get it to you. And then that way people can see it on your social medias or wherever you're going to put it. So Al, why don't you tell people a little bit about yourself, where you're from, and then we'll get into this.
Yeah, sure. Born and raised in Chicagoland area. I live in Chicago now. Right under sometimes I put in my bio, right under the flight paths of Midway Airport. I'm very close.
Oh, okay.
So I'm very used to that. I'm also a teacher. I teach English at a high school level. I have all seniors now, and I teach writing and literature. I've been doing that for this is my 21st year teaching.
Oh, wow.
So I've been doing that. Yeah, I taught a little bit of college also, and I taught music for a few years back earlier in my career. And, I was always into writing, and I had done a lot of nonfiction writing, little articles and things like that since college for journals, magazines, and a lot of the articles were about literature, books, and some music. And then in about, I think it was 2015, 2016, 2017, I really got into zines, and especially folk zines and folk horror. And I was reading some of the articles, and I thought, I can add to this, or I can do this, or I could have done this better. Or I know about this subject. Why don't I give it a try? So I reached out to some of the publishers of some of the zines and asked them, or would you be interested in if I write an essay about this? And they said, sure, send us one. And I got that from a lot of editors and publishers of zines, and I started that way. And it was only about 10 years ago that I started to do that, and I wrote basically all nonfiction all the way through 2020, that legendary year of the shutdowns. And when I was the COVID year, so during that time I tried my hand at fiction, and from that point on, most of my writing's been fiction, but I would say that when it comes to my published writing, half of it's fiction, half of it's nonfiction. So I have essays, which culminated in my first book, Endless Depths. And those are essays of weird lore and hidden knowledge and just obscure science, which is stuff that I like to read about.
I love that stuff too. So this is going to be an interesting conversation for both of us, I have a feeling, or at least me. You ever, since you were in the zine world, did you ever go to Quimby's in Chicago?
Absolutely. When people ask me what the best bookshop in Chicago is, we've got a lot of great bookshops, but I'd say Quimby's because it's impossible not to be interested in everything they have. They have that when you first enter, they have that table where they highlight just the books for the month, and it's just I can spend an hour just looking through those books itself. They really know what they're doing. Great curators of that area, and the people who work there support local authors also. And there's so many zines that you can go through. So absolutely, and that's a place where I did go to pick up a lot of the zines. And then from there, it actually was through Instagram that I got connected with other zines like Hellebore from England, which I ended up publishing in a couple of pieces in there. Just things that I like to read. Comic book zines. I wrote a couple pieces, contributed to the Holland Files, which is the international Swamp Thing zine. So you're speaking to an official Swamp Thing ambassador. I don't know if you know.
I love it, man.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah, so that's how I started out. Just things like that, talking about things that I loved, and that a lot of that, and the research I did into that, just doing the reading was a lot of the fun part of it, right?
Yeah.
So for example, one of the articles I wrote in the Swamp Thing zine was I was trying to trace a character through all of Swamp Thing's universe. And it really was a character that was part of the Lovecraftian world that a lot of people kind of forget about. His name is Monongahela. And Ramsey Campbell wrote about him, and a lot of other writers wrote about him. And I did that. So reading all those books in preparation for writing the essay was a fun part of it. I love doing that stuff. And that was that's what's behind a lot of the nonfiction writing that I do, all the research, which is fun.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, I'm an old zinester. Old and zinester, two different words. They go well together. Back in the early 90s, my wife and I had one. So the zine scene in Chicago, I'm still pretty familiar with. And I love it. I think there's so much to find there. It's kind of like indie music, kind of like podcasting, like outside of that mainstream, you find such gold.
You're absolutely right.
I've turned on to writers that you'd only find there in the beginning. It's so cool.
Yeah, well, so you said you had a zine. So the great thing about that is that you can be passionate about any topic. If you don't mind me asking, what was the topic or theme of your zine?
Ours were completely jackass. We did one it was originally called the Dead Elvis Fan Club, and all we did was write. It was comedy. It was all Dead Elvis related articles that were all jokes. And then Elvis Presley Enterprises didn't find it funny. And we got a letter, as we said, from the men in white polyester. They came knocking at our door, and we switched it to Disgraceland. And now I see all these things named Disgraceland. I'm like, I think we might have been the first. I'm not sure. And we got out, I think we pumped out 3 issues and then died on the vine, but we got international attention. We were in like Mojo Magazine and Access Magazine, and the BBC did a recording with us, 15-minute interview about it. So it's like it was great, man. And zines were that entry point. And in fact, if you listen to my show, Alley Chats, where I interview people you'd find in like an Artist Alley, I've had in fact, recently I've had a couple of zinesters. It seems to be thriving, which I love. Here's a little mini one. It's cool, man. And a friend of mine is actually if you could be a rock star in the zine world, he is. I went to high school with a guy, John Porcelino, who does King Cat Comics and owns Spit and a Half. And he's, like I said, he's kind of a legend in that world. So it's been fun. It's a fun world.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just your idea probably couldn't be started anywhere else, right? You did it yourself, but it's a really cool idea. And I would love if I saw that in the shelf, I'd absolutely pick it up. And that's cool. And I think that once you get the knock on the door from the Men in Black or the Men in Polyester, you've made it. You did it.
Oh yeah. We pissed somebody off and we were like, okay, that was it.
Great. Exactly.
I don't know if you remember, you're from Chicago. You remember when like The Loop it had Steve Dahl and Brandmeier and all those guys. We got featured on there. I had an hour-long interview on there because of this. Yeah. So it was a real nice gateway. It's just, we fell off at some point, it just happens.
Yeah. That's pretty cool. No, exactly. There's not a whole long lifespan to zines, but that's kind of cool thing about them anyway, right? Too, I think, and it's kind of fun to hear about zines that were around at one point, and when you're out there in the wild, you discover something that you'd heard about or maybe not never heard about. And if I ever see your zine in the wild, for example, that'd be like the most amazing find. That's like treasure to me,
Yeah, right.
Like
No, I get it.
Yeah.
I get it. We were in Portland and we walked into this comic store. I was with my niece and my daughter. My wife was hanging out outside. It's just this cool comic store. And then we go to the back and it's this wall of zines. And it was like you were talking about. There were literary zines, there were comedy, there was music stuff. And I found a holy grail. And I was like, oh my God, it's this great zine. It's fiction. I can't remember the name right now, but it got turned into a Netflix show. But back then, I think it's I Think I Should Die or something about that. It's a great zine. Very weird, right? And they had stapled, photocopied zines sitting on the shelf. I'm like, oh my God, I gotta have it,
Yeah, that's a really cool thing about the printed material, the printed word, like books, comics, zines. Those holy grails are still out there, and I think they're still out there for like records and other things too, like antiques. But I do think there's a lot more books out there, a lot more of the printed word hidden away, a lot more treasures to find.
I agree.
Yeah, that's what's fun about it. Yeah.
So you were writing this stuff. You transitioned to fiction. Was it? I mean, I can see where your interests lie, but was it just going to always be horror? Were you just like, when I do it, it's going to be horror?
That's a good question. That's just where it naturally felt right.
Okay.
And I don't know if I have a really good intellectual answer for that. It just feels right there. A lot of the science that I'm interested in is astronomy, geology. I'm really interested in books about like the origins of the Earth, the solar system, the universe, the planets, and geology. Like this deep time is something that really intrigues me. So I think that reading those, that really there is a sense of horror that comes along with that kind of science.
Yeah.
But yeah, not just aliens, but just the consciousness and the human mind, and the idea that, for example, when geology was modern geology anyway, in the 1800s, when people first started realizing that the Earth wasn't just a few thousand years old, and some people might still think that, unfortunately, but it's not 6,000 years old, it's millions or even billions of years old. When that started taking place in the 1800s, there was a revolution in the way that scientists thought about history and about time and about people's place in it. And that really impacted literature. Arthur Machen, he was someone who wrote about deep time and influenced the earliest weird literature at the end of the 19th century. Like the Great God Pan. I'm not sure if you've heard of that one.
Oh yeah,
that's
absolutely.
one of the earliest novellas longer short stories and weird lit, and that was strongly impacted by the discovery of deep time and geology. So those kinds of things, how literature and especially weird lit and horror is impacted by science and art, and you might not see that connection, but I think it's like my charge in some way to make those connections. That's what I love to do. Yeah.
I find it interesting what you're talking about here. One thing, people love to put people in boxes. They love to put ideas in boxes, and they go, "You're horror. Horror is this," which horror is a million things. And what you're talking about, it sounds like your interests, your brain goes into what we would deem horror, but your books could be categorized as, well, probably just Al Julius books. Like it's something else. It's like when you read like a Harlan Ellison, and some people know him as a horror writer, some know him as science fiction, and it's like, it's uniquely Ellison. He just had interests in those other things, which I find that fascinating.
I appreciate that thought, because I think that that's a takeaway that I'd like to have about my work if people read it, and it's not really easily categorizable. And I make appearances as a horror writer, but I like to tell people you're not going to find a lot of shock in them necessarily. Not that I don't like that. I love books like that or movies or whatever. That's not my thing. My thing is really just trying to unsettle you or question reality in some way. And Again, I like to talk about consciousness and the connection between the mind-body construct and consciousness in the real world. So The Lovecraftian stories are cool, but the coolest part I like about them is the characters that slowly descend into madness because they can't negotiate what's happening. And I think
Right.
that for me, that's really the scariest thing. When people ask me what I'm scared of, I'm not scared of death. I'm not scared or anything really. Like I don't get scared about ghosts or whatever. But what really scares me is if I were in a condition where I was losing my mind, and that's terrifying. That idea is the most terrifying thing for me, and I try to live with that. Yeah.
Yeah, I can understand that. My dad is in a memory care unit, and you see people that outwardly seem functioning, yet inside they might be seeing things that are just freaking the hell out of them, or that they're justifying. And when they say it to you, you go, oh, "Okay, yeah, that's not happening," and that scares me as well. Not just the getting dementia, the idea of losing the grip on reality, and when reality around you actually has changed and you can't reconcile it, that seems terrifying.
Yeah, that's exactly what I mean, and it's one of those things where I've also seen it too. Dementia, Alzheimer's, those are very real tragedies and real things that families and have to deal with. But again, right, when the fact that you might not know what's happening is what's the scariest part of it. So maybe I'm just thinking aloud here and sort of channeling that into a lot of the work that I do, because that consciousness is something I'm really interested in. And that's what I read about too when it comes to science also.
Yeah, in science fiction you get a lot of time travel, and that's one that I always think is fascinating. That they always talk about like the Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's court. He goes back in time and like he's comfortable with it, other than like, oh, this is weird. No, I think you'd lose your mind.
Yeah.
And I think going forward in time, you might lose your mind too, because your whole reality is just shattered. And they make it seem like you'd be cool, but I don't think you'd be cool. 10 years, sure. 1,000 years, not a chance.
Yeah, you remind me of, can I tell you really quickly about an idea that I kind of borrowed from Alan Moore? Do you know Alan Moore, the great comic writer?
Of course.
Yeah.
Alan Moore's amazing. In fact, I don't personally know Alan Moore, but one of my friends actually is an illustrator that's worked with Alan Moore. He has great Alan Moore stories. So
right?
Go ahead. Let's hear your Alan Moore.
Oh, is it Dave Campbell? Is that it, or no? It's someone else.
No, it's Gene Ha.
Oh, okay, great. Yeah, I know who that is. Awesome. Yeah. And I have a Dave Campbell side note too. After, if I could tell that, but there's this one moment in From Hell, in which William Gull, who is ostensibly Jack the Ripper in the book.
Spoilers. No, I'm kidding.
No, yeah, right. I think it's on the back of the book. So there's this one scene where all he's doing is just moving through a seedy part of London, the East End, and he's going in between buildings.
Mm-hmm.
And at one point, it's this little, what we might call a gangway here in Chicago. And he turns to look at a window, and it's usually these darkened windows, but then he sees a vision of the future through the window. And there's just a guy there drinking like a bottle of beer, and he's sitting on his couch, and there's, modern appliances, telephone there, and he's watching TV. And William Gull, the look of terror at his face, that's the only time he's terrified.
Yeah.
When he looks, he has a glimpse of the future. And the amazing thing is that Alan Moore doesn't really explain it, doesn't go into it. It's just like this one little thing that happens, and he moves on. And Gull has no idea what he's seeing. Yeah. Right. And that unknown. And it's just an amazing moment. It just gives me chills. Sometimes I go back once here, just read those 3 pages. And I borrowed it. Thank you, Alan Moore, for one of my stories in Weird Tales of the Great Lakes. It takes place in 1915 at the Eastland disaster. And there's a corpse robber that's moving through a gangway in Chicago. And he looks in one of the windows and he sees the future of Chicago. And I just had to borrow that moment from Alan Moore. Yeah.
Yeah. When you're describing it, it reminds me of that moment, because I love those moments as well. A moment just like that. It kind of opens up a whole universe and then it's gone. In The Shining, when he looks in and he sees the guy in the dog suit with the other guy. I know so many people that have obsessed about that 10 seconds.
Yeah, right. Yes.
What was he seeing? What was going on?
Yeah.
And it's gone. And I think that's really terrifying, because I mean, it might be funny for a moment, but I could see you like not being able to reconcile that, and everything shatters for you. What if that's the normal and you're outside of that and you're going, wait a minute, am I the one that's been weird the whole time?
Yeah, and it's almost like that to do put that thought into your mind, and it
Yeah.
might seem like a fantasy, or it might seem that if you were reading literature or watching a movie, you kind of think about it and forget about it. But I do think that those kind of moments do stay with you longer, whether it's your subconscious, your whatever you want to call it, your dream world, more than a lot of horror.
Yeah.
You can be maybe traumatized if you watch like a bloody or scary movie or something when you're young, and that might stay with you that way. But I think that those little ideas, where you just said it perfectly, where it opens up the universe and it's kind of closed off, and that's a perfect example in The Shining. And also, I think that's why I love David Lynch so much, because he does that also too. Even though you might think the whole narrative is one of those things that open up to another world, but even within that narrative, he has these little pockets of of unexplained kind of things that what David Lynch would say is you understand it on a deeper level that you can explain or articulate even, and that's what I like too. Right.
I do too. Now I want to talk about Weird Tales of the Great Lakes. Tell me about this, because this is the kind of book that absolutely intrigues me. Just the title alone, I'm already in. So I'd like the audience to hear about this.
Yeah, sure. It really goes a while back in my life when my parents, every summer we take a little road trip. And we didn't have money to sort of pile on a plane and go to Europe and things like that all the time. So we would take road trips, within a day or a couple of days, from Chicago, and a lot of it was Michigan and Wisconsin and places like that. And from an early age, I started getting really interested in just the lakes. And when we go to little bookshops, I'd see local authors and, the history of the lakes. And I'd start seeing that and picking those up as a teenager. And when I was, as I read a lot of the history of the Great Lakes, I saw that there were so many stories I never heard of. And I realized that, they were so interesting. And I think that going back to even like the history of indigenous peoples all the way through like just World War II and even after, there's a lot of folklore there. And I realized that over years, there's a lot of folklore here. When you think about folklore, the first thing that comes to people's minds sometimes is like the rural area. And you might think of like British folklore, even the East Coast. And I've been to the East Coast. There's so many books about, East Coast folklore.
Mm-hmm.
Massachusetts, Boston, that area,
yeah.
And there's really not a lot about the Great Lakes or Chicago area. There's some ghost stories and books about ghosts, but not a lot of folklore. So I started to really think about gathering a lot of these stories, and I have a whole section of my home library just dedicated to Great Lakes lore and history. And I realized that there were a lot of stories there that I think that more people should know. So what I did with my fiction is that I started off with an event or a point of lore on the Great Lakes, and I took that and I asked the question, what if? If I could just give you one example, in 1880, there was a shipwreck of a ship that left Chicago going to Minnesota. And again, there are different, with anything in history, of course, there's more than one version of the tale, but what people agree on is that when the ship went out, about 2 to 3 hours into its travel, it hit a sudden storm, the November Witch, they call it. And it retreated back on land. Everyone survived except for one person. That one person was the only woman who was on the ship. All the men survived. One woman drowned. And they all sort of fled. Nobody got the straight answer to what happened. So my idea was, what if this woman's spirit kind of, or whatever you want to call it, I don't really say ghost or spirit necessarily. I leave that up to the reader, but there's something in there. The woman, one by one, takes revenge on all the men that turned her back on her, and they end up drowning little by little throughout the rest of their lives. And that's not a spoiler, because the title of the story is The 7 Mysterious Drownings of the SS Neptune. So you see that, and it was a lot of fun writing that one to find out how they were going to meet their fate in the Great Lakes throughout their life. That's just one example of how a real life event inspired just a more weird tale.
Yeah. That, I'm telling you, this is my wheelhouse. This is the kind of thing I absolutely love, especially when you get a collection of short stories that delve into that. And there's that it's more than a grain of truth. There's that, this is what it's based on, and the what if. I absolutely love it. Your Tales of the Great Lakes, how far did you go up into like the UP? Did you go into like Ohio and Middle Bass and all that area?
There's only, I think 10 or 11 stories. I think it's 11 altogether. Yes, I did. I have to admit that a lot of it's closer to the Chicago area just because I visit a lot of those places. And a few of the events, and if I should say a few of the stories, there's more than one piece of lore that I mixed together. I took that poetic license to put those together. So there's one event that took place, for example, on Lake Huron that I moved to Lake Ontario, just because it just worked there. But most of the stories I want to be historically accurate in terms of like what you were able to do at the time. And what I mean by that is that if you were not able to sail on a steamship, for example, from Chicago to Duluth until after a certain canal was built, I made sure that was accurate. So I did some research like that. Well, other than that, I move things around. There's also a story about Death's Door, which is, and I don't want to say too much about it. My book is a fiction, but that last one is a little bit of nonfiction in there. And again, I don't want to give too much away about that, but there is a legend of a battle between the Winnebago and the Potawatomi that took place on the northern tip of Door County, on the strait between Door County and Washington Island. I don't know if you've ever been up there. It's really beautiful.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but that area is Death's Door, and I took that the idea that there's just the spirit of this battle and this violence that it's still there at Death's Door, and I went with that.
Very interesting. Yeah, actually, that area, I was up there when I was a teenager for a jazz camp. Nerd. I was up there 2 years, and the second year, they gave us a day off, 2 weeks of just nonstop playing. Your mouths were on fire all the time and bleeding, and it was great though, right? Then they took us to the coast. We could swim in the Great Lake, and I almost drowned. My friend saved me. My friend to this day is the reason that I'm here. And that area, because of that, when you said that area, my brain went like, oh, no. And then you said Death's Door. I'm like, yep, no, I'm going to have to read it. Don't want to. Because, that's an imprint on me. And that's the kind of thing that can be, once again, a seed for, I don't want to say a horror story, but it could be a horror story or something unsettling.
Right. People don't realize how dangerous the Great Lakes are. Yeah. In some ways, I'd rather be dropped in the middle of the Pacific Ocean and rather than like the middle of like Lake Superior, for example. The way that the currents work in the Great Lakes are very deceptive. And a lot of people, unfortunately, have lost their life. And that's why so many people were not able to be rescued with the Great Lakes shipwrecks. And just because of the dangerous waters. And you could float around in the middle of the ocean in some parts, and you wouldn't be able to do that in a lot of the Great Lakes, especially when there's a storm. I mean, you have no chance. Yeah.
So you've worked in a couple of anthologies. I see Interior Skies here.
Mm-hmm.
I see, what's the one I was looking at? Well, Dark Matter magazine you've written in. Do you, at this point, do you find yourself to be leaning towards being a novelist, or are you like, I just really love the short story form?
Well, I thought about becoming, rather than a novelist, a novellaist. I've written a few so far that I'm still editing at this point, a couple of different novellas. My next short story collection hopefully will be out sometime by the end of 2026. I'm still sort of shopping around a little bit. I'm not sure if it's going to be how that's going to work. But it's virtually done except for a part in the novella that I need to bridge. And what I mean by that is that most of my stories are 3,000, 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 words. This novella is 25,000 and probably end up being closer to 30.
Okay.
So I'd like to, in my mind, what works for me is that I'll expand that way. And I'm learning a lot.
Yeah.
If you're any creative act that you do, whether, and you said you play music, by the way, I'm also a jazz musician. I'm not sure if you knew that.
Oh, yeah.
but everything you do, if you expand it and you learn a lot by just doing it, right? I can sit down and if I want to compose something or if I want to arrange something, I learned arranging in college just because I did it. I learned about it. I thought I knew how to do it, but it wasn't until I started arranging for a 5-piece band that I really knew how to do it.
Right.
It's not, I learned how to, or I'm learning how to write a novella by doing it. And there's a lot of things you don't realize and how it works. And
yep.
Thank you for that question, because that's definitely something that's going to motivate me to really continue to do it, because, at this point I'm sort of stuck only because it's not quite what I want. And as a writer, it's one of those things where something can be finished, but it's not really finished in my head. The words are on paper, but it's not quite there. I don't really have the best idea of how to bridge, the last or the penultimate act into the ending. I have a good ending, or at least I think it's good. I have a good narrative, but I can't quite make that. There's something in the way there that I can't figure out, but it'll come to me. It'll come to me, I hope.
Okay. I got a question. You said you're a jazz musician. What do you play?
Piano. Yeah.
I used to play. I played saxophone. I don't really play anymore, and I cut off part of my finger, and I used it as an excuse. But the reality is, every time my wife says we should get you a new horn and you should do, I don't really have the desire. I just love music. My dad was an avant-garde jazz musician.
Oh,
so the house is full of music, and I absolutely see the strength in it. Now, when you're writing, do you use music as a motivator? Like, do you have to play playlists, or is it just kind of part of your life?
No, I do actually. I don't really listen to jazz. I do listen to it, but not when I'm writing.
Mm-hmm.
I probably have, but I have to listen to instrumental music. So jazz does work.
That's me as well.
Yeah, I can't listen to words, because if I hear lyrics, even if I know the song, I can know something very well. And even if I play it, my brain automatically goes to the words, and I can't do that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I do listen to a kind of music. I'm not sure if you're familiar with, or what any listeners are familiar with, but it's called dungeon synth. It's sort of newer.
I love this
music.
name. I don't know dungeon synth.
If you want to, it's basically dark, bleak, ambient music.
Yeah.
That is mostly synth based, and it started that way, but it's not really quite dark and as dark and bleak anymore, because with any artistic movement, there are a lot of branches that come off of that, right? Yeah. And so now it's not necessarily all very, very dark, but most of it is inspired by medieval music. It started off that way, and it's the vibe is sort of like this a vibe of sadness, if you want to call it that, or melancholy. Mm-hmm. So I listen to that a lot as I'm writing Dungeon Synth. Yeah.
I just pulled up a playlist for Dungeon Synth on Spotify, so I will definitely be checking that out. Yeah, I mean, like, I remember back in the early 90s picking up Brian Eno ambient music albums and just digging the hell out of that. Airport was one that I listened to a lot. Nobody could understand why I could listen to it, because it's just ambient sounds of an airport, and I loved it.
That's great. Yeah, and it's funny you mentioned that one, because there is a Brian Eno album that I did listen to when I was writing something. I can't remember what I was writing, but it was a Small Craft on a Milk Sea, I believe the name of the album is.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Yeah, I love it. Actually, and from the jazz perspective, somebody I had forgotten about, my daughter's going to the new school, and she's got a friend who's a jazz guitarist. And she said, "Oh, the guy who runs the one program, you probably heard of him. It's John Zorn." I just about passed out. I hadn't listened to John Zorn since, I don't know, mid-90s. I don't know why. He just fell off, and I always liked him. Yeah. I've been going through, and man, does that guy he runs the gamut on what he's doing, and the music is just amazing. So I've been having a lot of fun, and he's got that ambient thing sometimes. Some of his stuff is like, I'm like, what is going on here, man? Like, it's cool. It's cool. So, yeah. Now we have more to talk about, but we're going to run out of time here. So pick up Al's books. You can find them on Amazon. You can find them in the links in the show notes here. I'm sure they can find you in some bookstores, right, Al?
That's right. Some of the anthologies are in bookshops, and some of the local bookshops around Chicago do carry Weird Tales of the Great Lakes and Endless Depths.
I've actually seen Writer's Retreat out in the wild. I don't know where, but I've seen it. So that's another one that's out there, but you can always order, and I want you to find Al, go to events that he's at, and buy his books directly from him. And I have a question. Oh, and it's Aleco, or Aleco. Did I say it right?
Aleco's on the that's my full name. I go by Al, but Aleco's on the books. Yeah.
Right. Aleco Julius. That's what it says on the books. But he's Al if you see him in the wild.
Yep.
And follow him, buy his books, tell people about him. I mean, I do want you to, I want to encourage that because I think your stuff is just so cool. And I'm so into this. And I am, when we're done here, ordering Weird Tales of the Great Lakes because, oh my gosh, you've hit my sweet spot on that one. Al, what's the best place for people to follow you where they're going to get engagement?
Yeah, thanks. The best place to follow is Instagram. So I'm at Dagger of the Mind on Instagram. That's where I've connected with a lot of authors, and I'll post there very often. And anytime there's an event, anytime there's a signing, anytime I have a new publication, and I promote the anthologies and other publishers and other authors on there. So Instagram's the best way.
Perfect. Yeah. Actually, I'm gonna encourage something because I'm gonna totally do this. When you pick up one of Al's books, or if you're just leafing through his Instagram, grab the Dragon Synth or Dungeon Synth playlist and listen to it while you listen to that, and you'll get deeper into what he's saying. I'm a big fan of mixing the music and the reading. Mike Nesmith had an album called The Prison way back where he it's beautiful, but there's a book inside, and you're supposed to read the book as you listen, and it was just the best experience. So to me, here we've got another opportunity. We know what you listen to. Read the book while you do it. You're going to get more out of it. Al, thank you so much for being on. I'm sure we'll do other things in the future. You're a local boy, and this is great. This was just fabulous. Thank you so much.
Oh, thanks a lot, Rob. I really appreciate the opportunity well, we had a great conversation, but the fact that more people listen to it, for everybody who's listening, feel free to reach out to me on Instagram. You can message me, ask any questions, whatever, anytime. I'm always open.
Fabulous. And share his stuff with your friends. You don't know who's out there like me that when you say folklore, they go, whoa. When you say Great Lakes, Weird Tales, they go, whoa. You don't know who your friends are going to get lit up by. I think they're going to get lit up by Al. So thank you, Al.
Thanks, Rob. Appreciate that very much.